It is 3/20 of 2015. We continue with our study of the Dead Sea Scrolls. We're looking at the Damascus scroll, which was actually authored by the Qumran community. And we looked at exhortation, which was the first half of the scroll. Now we're going to look at the rules, and the rules are interesting because you really get a look at what was it like during the time of the ministry of Jesus Christ. What did it mean to be a Sadducee? We get a good look at that because we're actually going to see what a Sadducee writer considered the rules of morality and the rules of behavior. So it's an interesting little section. It gives us a chance to really see what I liked is just the stipulations for the Sabbath, which are you're gonna find they're unbelievable. But anyway, we're going to take a look at these rules, and we're going to look at basically what they were concerned with primarily was purification. So we're going to look at the general rules for purification. Then we're going to look at the membership rules to join the Qumran community of Sadducees. And then the rules of the Sabbath, which were the most important rules of all. So we'll take a look at these, that'll finish up our Damascus scroll that was found in Cave 4. Okay, the very first thing we're looking at is the general laws or general rules of purification. There were 10, and I'm not going to read the rule, but I have the references. If you're having trouble reading the screen, it's always better to click on YouTube first and then click full screen. If you leave it in Facebook and click full screen, it's not going to be as clear to read. So always click YouTube first, then full screen. And you should be able to read all these references. But I'm just going to read the 10 laws that they wanted to be concerned with. And that was leprosy, scalp and beard contaminations, bodily discharge, a woman going through her period, menstruating, the purification after childbirth, harvest, gleaning, and tithes, which really was just rules on tithing in general, which of course is really important to a commune because it is a shared property. Disclosure in business deals and betrothal, and measurements and offerings. Meat either purchased by or received by Gentiles, so whether you can or cannot eat Gentile meat, because the blood had to be let in a very specific way for Sadducees. And then finally, rules on animal skin clothing. So those were the 10 general things they wanted to look at for purification that you had to be careful of if you were going to live in their community of Sadducees. Now for membership, they had 5 aspects of their oath. The oath that you would take would be the covenant with Moses. Moses was priority for them, so it was a covenant with Moses. You stipulated that you would return to an obedience to the laws of Moses, and that you would act morally in accordance with the spirit of the covenant of Moses. So think about that. They were against interpretation, but obviously, because remember the Pharisees believed in interpreting the law. Well, you have to interpret the law if you're going to say that they have to act within the confines of the spirit of the covenant. So who's determining the spirit of the covenant? That's going to be the Sadducees. So I never could figure that out. There's always interpretation. I don't care if you're a fundamentalist or not. The Sadducees were fundamentalists. But they do interpret. Everybody interprets. I don't care who you are. So that's my own private thing, though. So forget that. Anyway, that you had to live according to the spirit of the covenant with Moses, and then you would appear before the overseer of membership for an oral exam. And if you pass that oral exam, you would take the actual oath of membership. After you took the oath of membership, you entered into a 1-year trial period where you would study the laws of the Qumran community. And then you would subject yourself willingly to the judging leadership. They had 10 ruling judges of their community. They were priests, and they were those who had studied the book of meditation. I love this. They were between the ages of 25 and 60 because they felt that anyone over 60 had a mind that was regressing and could no longer be reliable. Well, great. I'm in bad shape here. I've got a regressing mind. Okay. Anybody over 60, their mind is regressing, and so you could not be in any position of authority if you were over 60. I just think that's wild because Plato said don't trust anybody younger than 50 for any kind of intellectual discourse. So I think that's really wild. The great philosopher Plato wouldn't trust anyone under 50, but the Qumran Sadducees wouldn't trust anybody over 60. So there you go. Then you had to pass through the rites of purification. And then the most important thing of all, if you wanted to join the Qumran community or any Sadducee community, you had to obey the rules of the Sabbath, and they were strict, and they were added to in very specific ways. It's not just the 10 Commandments. I'm going to read these in a second, but you had the A to Z, the 36 rules of Sabbath. And so we're going to take a look at that next. This is really what this lesson is about. Here are the A to Z rules of the Qumran community that need to be obeyed. Basically the rules of the Sabbath. There was no working allowed. No coarse or empty words could be used. Empty words, you couldn't have casual talk. No empty words. No settling of loans. No court matters at all. No discussing the next day's work. No field activity whatsoever. No travel outside the city. Let's say you were in Jerusalem with the Sadducees. There was no traveling outside the city. There was no preparation of food. You had to prepare your food the day before that you were going to eat during the Sabbath. No drawing of water, so you better have drawn your water the day before. And then I love this one, J, because that's human nature, right? Just find a loophole, find a loophole. So they were hiring Gentiles to do their work on the Sabbath. So they had to come up with a rule and say, no hiring a Gentile to do your errands. And then you cannot cross Sabbath borders, no wearing of dirty clothes. You could not force your animals to do anything on the Sabbath. You had to leave your animals alone. You couldn't carry anything in or out of your dwelling. You could not open a sealed vessel. You could not carry medicine on your person. I think of Luke here because Luke was a physician, and luckily he was a Gentile physician, because if not, he couldn't have carried any medicine and helped anybody. You couldn't carry medicine during the Sabbath. So luckily Luke was a Gentile physician, so you didn't have to worry about that. But according to the Sadducees, you couldn't even carry medicine on your person. Q, you couldn't pick up stones or dust in another person's dwelling or in your own dwelling. You couldn't do any kind of cleaning. If you were a caregiver, you could not carry a baby on the Sabbath. You couldn't provoke any servants. You couldn't assist an animal with giving birth. A humanitarian act, you couldn't do it. You couldn't rescue any fallen animal. And this is really good. But you talk about purification. You could not rest in any place that was even close to a Gentile. No acquisition of wealth whatsoever. And here's a good one. Like, here's your humanitarian Sadducees. You could not rescue a fallen person who had fallen into a pit. You couldn't offer them a rope or a ladder. Okay, there you go. That's really a great Sadducee idea there. And then you couldn't do any sacrificing except the whole burnt offering in the temple, and you couldn't send the offering to the temple with somebody who was impure. And then beyond Z, here's your last biggie: no sex on the Sabbath. Sabbath, no sex. So how do they catch you? I don't know. No sex on the Sabbath. Somehow they're going to catch you. Okay. Now, defilement from the insane or the Gentiles. After an insane person had recovered, they were to be washed for 7 years to prevent them from committing any acts of impurity. And there was no selling of clean sacrificial type animals to Gentiles, because they didn't want any Gentiles sneaking in and actually making a covenant sacrifice. Really wanted to make sure that they, Sadducees were really restrictive. They didn't want to share the doxazo glory of God with anyone. Not with Gentiles. Gentiles were unclean. So, don't let them trick us. Don't let them get a hold of sacrificial animals and then come in here and be able to sneak in a sacrifice to our God. This God belongs to us. So anyway, I thought it was an interesting lesson. To me, it was kind of interesting to look at, because there's no way that I don't think I know anyone who could survive the rules of the Sabbath here. But that was their A to Z for the rules of the Sabbath. And that'll wrap up. Now that takes us up through 70. Next time we'll look at the specific rules for, these are the rules for Jerusalem, for cities, but we'll look at rules for outlying areas outside the city.